Spring 1942. Luftwaffe Intelligence Briefing Room. Frozen airfield outside Stalingrad. Lieutenant Hans Weber spit his coffee across the morning report when he read the line about American P-39 Airacobras arriving in Soviet hands. They're giving Stalin the Airacobra? He laughed so hard his ribs hurt. The Americans have finally figured out how to help us win this war. Around the room, a dozen German pilots joined the laughter. Captain Ernst Hoffmann grabbed the report and called out to the intelligence officer. "Is this confirmed?" "Confirmed. First shipment arrived in Murmansk last week." Weber wiped tears from his eyes. "Gentlemen, I propose we send congratulations to Soviet High Command. Perhaps a gift basket." Major Klaus Richter, wing commander with 73 kills, stood and raised his coffee cup. "To our American friends, may they send many more of these magnificent aircraft to our enemies." The room erupted. They'd all seen the intelligence reports on the P-39. The British had tested it first, rejected it outright. Their pilots called it a death trap at altitude. The Royal Air Force had sent the Americans a formal letter diplomatic language wrapping around a simple message: "Keep your flying coffin." American pilots weren't more charitable. In the Pacific Theater, they'd given it nicknames: Iron Dog, Flying Coffin, the Widowmaker. One Marine pilot had written that he'd rather bail out and swim than face a zero in a P-39. The statistics backed the contempt. 0 air-to-air kills in its first 6 months of deployment. Multiple losses. Pilots refused to fly it. The engine placement behind the pilot, connected by a 10-foot drive shaft, made it tail-heavy and unpredictable. It couldn't climb above 15,000 feet. Weber had memorized the specifications. The P-39 was built as a high-altitude interceptor, but at high altitude it was useless. German Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds could outclimb it by 3,000 feet per minute. The Focke-Wulf Fu 190 could outmaneuver it in any turn. What were the Americans thinking? Hoffmann asked. They mounted a 37mm cannon in the nose. The weight alone ruins the performance. Typical American excess, Richter said. That cannon probably weighs more than our entire armament package. The 37mm was absurd. German and British fighters used rifle-caliber machine guns, maybe 20mm cannons. 37mm was anti-tank gun territory. It made the aircraft nose heavy, sluggish, unresponsive. American doctrine called for sustained dogfighting. You needed agility for that, not a cannon that fired 5 rounds before jamming. "The Soviets are desperate," Weber said. "They'll take anything. Their air force is finished." He wasn't wrong. By spring 1942, the Luftwaffe owned the Eastern Front skies. Soviet losses in the first year of Operation Barbarossa had been catastrophic. Thousands of aircraft destroyed on the ground in the opening weeks. Thousands more shot down by German aces who hunted in packs. Richter himself had 73 confirmed kills. Captain Heinrich Hartmann from the neighboring squadron had 91. There were men at this airfield who'd shot down more Soviet aircraft than entire American squadrons had seen combat. The Eastern Front had become a training ground for Luftwaffe aces. Soviet pilots were brave, suicidally brave, but bravery without equipment was target practice. They flew obsolete aircraft with inadequate training. They rammed German planes when they ran out of ammunition. They crashed burning fighters into tank columns rather than bail out. Desperation tactics from a desperate air force. "How many are they sending?" someone asked. The intelligence officer checked his notes. "Estimates suggest 5,000 aircraft over the next 2 years. Weber laughed again. 5,000 flying coffins. Stalin has officially given up. The war will be over by autumn, Hoffmann said. Drinks tonight, Richter announced. To the P-39 Airacobra, the worst fighter aircraft ever built, and the Soviet Union's newest acquisition. They raised their cups. They drank. They laughed. Outside, mechanics prepared their Messerschmitts for the day's patrol. German air superiority was absolute. Soviet pilots died at a rate of 10 to 1, sometimes 20 to 1. The P-39 wouldn't change that. If anything, it would make German pilots' jobs easier. Weber finished his coffee and headed to the flight line. He had 2 missions scheduled: morning patrol over the Volga, afternoon ground attack near the city. Easy work. He'd flown 63 combat missions without serious incident. The Soviets couldn't touch him. He climbed into his Bf-109, ran through pre-flight checks, and taxied to the runway. The engine hummed perfectly. The aircraft responded to every input with precision. This was engineering. This was what separated German aviation from the rest of the world. As he lifted off into the gray spring sky, he thought about those P-39 seconds sitting in some Soviet hangar. He almost felt sorry for the poor bastards who'd have to fly them. Almost. The plane was a joke. The Americans knew it. The British knew it. The Germans knew the Soviets would learn it the hard way. Within 6 months, nobody would be laughing. The P-39 Airacobra wasn't just bad. It was a mechanical catastrophe wrapped in aluminum skin, sold as a fighter aircraft. Bell Aircraft Corporation had designed it in 1939 with a single mission: high-altitude bomber interception. Climb fast, reach 30,000 feet, destroy German bombers before they reached American cities. Simple doctrine. Sensible goal. The execution was a disaster. The engine sat behind the pilot, not beside him, not in front of him, behind him, connected to the propeller by a 10-foot drive shaft that ran between the pilot's legs. This wasn't innovative engineering. This was mechanical insanity. The design made the aircraft tail-heavy, prone to flat spins, and nearly impossible to recover from certain maneuvers. American test pilots reported the same problem repeatedly. The P-39 wanted to kill you. One wrong move at low speed, and the aircraft would snap into a spin that no amount of stick input could fix. You either had altitude to recover, or you died. At high altitude, the environment it was designed for, the P-39 couldn't climb. The Allison V-1710 engine lacked a supercharger. Above 15,000 feet, it gasped for air like a drowning man. German Bf-109 seconds could outclimb it by 3,000 feet per minute. Japanese Zeros danced circles around it. Even the obsolete British Hurricanes performed better at altitude. The British had tested the P-39 inches late, 1,941. Their evaluation report was brutally honest. Dangerous in friendly hands, useless against enemy. British pilots refused to fly it in combat. The RAF returned every single aircraft, sending them back across the Atlantic with a polite note suggesting the Americans find another use for them. The Americans tried anyway. In the Pacific, Marine pilots climbed into P-39 cockpits and faced Japanese Zeros. The results were predictable. The P-39 couldn't outclimb the Zero, couldn't outmaneuver it, couldn't outdive it. In the first 6 months of Pacific combat, P-39 squadrons recorded 0 confirmed air-to-air kills against multiple losses. 0 kills, multiple coffins. Pilots started calling it the Iron Dog, a machine too stubborn to fly right, too heavy to perform, too dangerous to trust. Some called it the Flying Coffin. Others just called it a death sentence. Squadron commanders stopped assigning it for fighter missions. It became a ground attack aircraft by default, strafing enemy positions where its flaws mattered less. But that 37mm cannon made even ground attack problematic. Bell had mounted an M4 autocannon in the nose, the same gun used in anti-tank roles. It fired a shell 3 times larger than standard fighter armament. American tacticians called it dead weight. The weapon added 800 pounds to the nose, disrupting the aircraft's already questionable balance. It carried only 30 rounds. The recoil from firing could stall the engine if you weren't careful, and it jammed constantly. American doctrine emphasized sustained dogfighting, multiple passes, extended engagements, gradual attrition of enemy forces. You needed a lightweight, maneuverable aircraft with reliable machine guns that could fire thousands of rounds. The P-39's massive cannon was the opposite of everything American pilots wanted. The design made sense only if you ignored reality. Bell had built the aircraft around that cannon, assuming bomber interception required heavy firepower. They were right about the firepower, wrong about everything else. By the time the P-39 reached operational altitude, enemy bombers were already past. By the time it lined up a shot, they'd escaped. The cannon that justified the entire design was useless because the aircraft couldn't reach its targets. Production continued anyway. Bell had government contracts. Factories were running. By early 1942, thousands of P-39 seconds sat in American hangars, with no one willing to fly them in combat. Then the Soviets asked for fighters. Any fighters. They were desperate. The first P-39 seconds arrived at Murmansk in April 1942. Soviet pilots gathered around them, examining the strange engine placement, the cramped cockpit, the odd tricycle landing gear. Their reactions ranged from confusion to outright anger. "This is what the Americans send?" one pilot asked. "This trash?" "The engine is backwards," another said, peering into the inspection panels. "It's a joke. It has to be a joke." Soviet mechanics ran tests. The performance numbers confirmed every fear. The P-39 was slower than Soviet aircraft they already had, couldn't climb as well as the Yak-1, turned worse than the MiG-3. The only advantage was that cannon, and nobody knew what to do with a 37mm gun on a fighter. "American garbage," one squadron commander said, signing the acceptance paperwork. But garbage is better than nothing. They had no idea they were holding a weapon nobody else understood how to use. October 1942. Frozen airfield 20 miles west of Stalingrad. Soviet Lieutenant Ivan Babak strapped into his P-39 Cobra for his first combat mission, 23 years old. Former tractor mechanic from Ukraine. 3 weeks of training in an aircraft nobody wanted to fly. The mission was simple: ground attack on German positions along the Volga River. 4 P-39 seconds flying at 2,000 feet, low and fast, in and out before the Luftwaffe noticed. They noticed. 6 Messerschmitt Bf, 109 seconds, dropped out of the clouds at 8,000 feet. The German formation was textbook perfect, 2 groups of 3, positioned for a classic bounce. The leader radioed back to base. "Engaging flock of American trash. 4 aircraft. Easy kills." Babak saw them coming. No time to run. No altitude to maneuver. The Germans had every advantage. Experience. The lead German pilot had 47 confirmed kills. Babak had 0. Speed. The Bf, 109 seconds, dove at 400 miles per hour. The P-39 seconds were cruising at 250. Maneuverability. At low altitude, the Messerschmitt could outturn, outclimb, and outroll anything the Soviets flew. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. The lead 109 selected his target, the trailing P-39, slightly separated from formation. Babak's aircraft. The German pilot, Lieutenant Hans Schmidt, lined up his shot from 6 o'clock high. Perfect angle. Perfect distance. He'd done this 47 times before. Babak didn't turn, didn't try to evade, didn't follow any doctrine Schmidt had ever seen. He pulled back on the stick and stood the P-39 on its tail. Vertical climb. Full throttle. The Allison engine screamed. The aircraft clawed upward at an impossible angle, 70 degrees, 80 degrees, nearly straight up, for exactly 2 seconds. Schmidt flashed underneath, his carefully planned attack vector suddenly wrong. He was below his target, looking up at the P-39's belly. His mind registered this was wrong, all wrong. But 47 kills created muscle memory faster than conscious thought could process new information. Babak fired. 1 burst, 1 second. The 37mm cannon roared once. The round entered Schmidt's engine, cowling at the oil cooler. It punched through the cylinder block, through the crankcase, through the mounting frame. The Daimler-Benz engine didn't just fail, it exploded. Metal fragments shredded the firewall. The propeller shaft snapped. The nose section separated from the fuselage. Schmidt had no time to process what happened, no time to reach for the canopy release, no time to bail out. The Messerschmitt fell like a stone, 900 feet, 6 seconds. It hit the frozen steppe at terminal velocity and disintegrated. The remaining 5 Germans broke formation. This wasn't a tactical withdrawal. This wasn't a regroup. This was panic. 5 veteran Luftwaffe pilots scattered like startled birds, diving away from the P-39 seconds that shouldn't have been able to touch them. Babak's aircraft stalled at the top of its climb, nose pitched over, and dove back to safety at treetop level. His wingman followed. The entire engagement had lasted 11 seconds. The German wingman, Feldwebel Otto Brandt, radioed back to base. His voice cracked. "Schmidt is down. He's down. The Aerocobra it executed his plane. 1 shot. Just 1 shot." "Repeat?" The radio operator didn't believe what he was hearing. 1 shot through the engine. The whole aircraft came apart. "We're breaking off." "You're breaking off from 4 inferior aircraft?" Brandt didn't respond. He was already 5 miles away, climbing back to safe altitude, trying to understand what he'd just witnessed. At the Soviet airfield, Babak landed with 900 pounds of fuel remaining, and 29 rounds left in his cannon magazine. He'd fired 1 round, destroyed 1 aircraft. The ground crew crowded around, asking questions he couldn't answer. "Did you hit the fuel tank?" "No." "The engine?" "How many rounds?" "1. 1 burst?" "1 round." The squadron commander arrived, skeptical. "You destroyed a Messerschmitt with 1 round?" "The cannon." It went through the engine block. The whole front section came apart. The commander stared at him, then at the P-39, then back at Babak. "File your report." Exactly as it happened. German intelligence received Brandt's report 3 hours later. They marked it as combat stress. 5 veteran pilots scattered by 4 P-39 seconds. 1 aircraft destroyed by a single round from an inferior weapon. Impossible. The P-39 was a known quantity. A joke. This had to be exaggeration, trauma, confusion. They filed it away and forgot about it. But Brandt didn't forget. Schmidt's Messerschmitt hadn't been damaged, hadn't been crippled, hadn't been disabled. 1 round had executed it, turned it from a functional aircraft into falling debris in less than a second. And the pilot who fired that round had done something Brandt had never seen in 3 years of combat. Instead of running from a superior enemy, he'd attacked straight up, into the dive, using the one advantage nobody else had recognized. That 37mm cannon wasn't dead weight. At close range, it was a death sentence. What they'd just witnessed violated everything they knew about air combat. Inferior aircraft didn't destroy superior ones with single shots. Desperate pilots didn't win by attacking into a bounce. The P-39 was supposed to be easy prey. Schmidt had been the predator. Now he was scattered across frozen steppe, and nobody could explain how it happened. The Eastern Front Air War was a meat grinder. Soviet pilots measured survival in missions, not months. 10 missions made you experienced. 20 made you a veteran. 30 made you impossibly lucky. The statistics were catastrophic. In the first year of Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Air Force lost over 21,000 aircraft. German kill counts reflected the slaughter. Major Erich Hartmann, 352 confirmed kills. Major Gerhard Barkhorn, 301. Dozens of Luftwaffe pilots exceeded 100 kills. Western aces celebrated reaching 5. Soviet doctrine adapted to desperation. When you ran out of ammunition, you rammed. When your aircraft caught fire, you didn't bail out, you aimed at enemy columns. One Soviet pilot said it simply, "Get close enough that if I die, I take him with me." This wasn't bravery. This was mathematics. If one Soviet pilot could trade his life for one German ace, the exchange favored the Soviets. Then Major Alexander Pokrishkin looked at the P-39 and saw what nobody else did. 28 years old, Donbass region, mining family. Taught himself aviation theory from library books while working factory jobs. 2 years of Eastern Front combat made him ancient by Soviet standards. Most pilots his age were dead. When the first P-39 seconds arrived in September 1942, other pilots saw a flawed aircraft. Pokrishkin walked around it slowly, studying everything. He asked about performance numbers. Terrible, above 4,000 meters, the maintenance officer said. And below? Much better. The engine runs strong. Pokrishkin nodded. The P-39 was designed for high-altitude bomber interception, a mission that didn't exist on the Eastern Front. Here, everything happened at treetop level. At low altitude, the P-39's engine performed beautifully. But that 37mm cannon, that's what changed everything. Americans saw dead weight. Pokrishkin saw a tank-killing weapon mounted in an aircraft. German fighters were built light, thin aluminum, minimal armor. A 37mm round didn't need to hit the fuel tank. It just needed to hit anywhere. The kinetic energy alone would cause catastrophic failure. Soviet pilots already fought at suicidal range. They just hadn't had a weapon that could kill in one shot. The P-39 wasn't a traditional fighter. It was an execution weapon. He saw something in that useless 37mm cannon that would change everything. Bell Aircraft Corporation built the P-39 for a war that never happened. American doctrine in 1939 assumed the next war would look like the last one. Massive bomber formations at high altitude, attacking cities deep in enemy territory. America needed interceptors that could climb to 30,000 feet, engage bombers, and shoot them down before they reached their targets. The P-39 was designed for exactly that mission. It failed miserably. The Allison V-1710 engine choked above 15,000 feet. German bombers flew at 25,000. By the time a P-39 wheezed up to interception altitude, the bombers were already over their targets. American doctrine required high-altitude performance. The P-39 couldn't deliver. Simple failure of basic requirements. The Eastern Front didn't care about American requirements. German bombers over Stalingrad flew at 6,000 feet, sometimes lower. Junkers Ju-87 Stukas attacked at treetop level. Messerschmitts bounced Soviet formations at 4,000 feet. The entire air war happened in the thick air below 5,000 feet, where engines gulped oxygen and aircraft performed exactly as their designers intended, if their designers had intended low-altitude combat. Bell aircraft hadn't. The Soviets didn't care. At low altitude, the P-39's Allison engine performed beautifully. The supercharger that couldn't compress thin air at altitude had nothing to do at 6,000 feet. The engine produced its full 1,200 horsepower. The aircraft accelerated cleanly, climbed aggressively, and responded crisply to control inputs. Everything that made it sluggish at altitude made it powerful down low. The engine placement that American pilots cursed became an advantage. Mounting the engine behind the pilot, connected by that 10-foot drive shaft, had created the tail-heavy handling that killed inexperienced pilots. But it also moved weight toward the center of the aircraft, improving roll rate, and it gave Soviet pilots something they'd never had: unobstructed forward visibility. American pilots didn't need forward visibility for bomber interception. You engaged from behind and above. Soviet pilots needed to see the ground for low-altitude attack runs, spot enemy fighters against terrain, and track targets through violent maneuvering. The P-39's nose was mostly cannon and glass. Perfect for ground attack. Perfect for knife fighting at 200 feet. But none of that mattered compared to what Pokrishkin understood about that 37mm cannon. American tacticians saw it as a mistake. The M4 autocannon fired a shell weighing 1 pound 6 ounces, a single round. Contrast that with the Browning 50 caliber machine gun, standard American armament. The 50 calories fired a bullet weighing less than 2 ounces. You needed 6 50 calories rounds to equal the weight of one 37mm shell. American doctrine emphasized volume of fire. Multiple machine guns, thousands of rounds, sustained bursts that sawed through enemy aircraft over time. A typical American fighter carried 6 50-caliber guns with 1,800 rounds total. Spray and pray. Put enough bullets in the air, and something critical would break. The P-39 carried 30 37mm rounds. 30. After 30 seconds of sustained fire, you were out. American pilots hated it. You couldn't sustain a dogfight with 30 rounds. Pokrishkin realized you didn't need to dogfight. The 37mm round was designed for anti-tank warfare. It punched through steel armor, detonated inside the target, and destroyed the vehicle from within. A German Panzer III had 30mm of frontal armor. The M4 cannon could penetrate 50mm. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 had 2mm of aluminum skin. The math was absurd. A round designed to destroy tanks hitting an aircraft built from thin metal. The 50 caliber needed to hit something critical. The engine, fuel tank, control cables, pilot. The 37mm just needed to hit the aircraft, anywhere. The kinetic energy alone, a 1-pound projectile traveling 2,500 feet per second, would tear through aluminum like paper. When the high explosive charge detonated inside the fuselage, it didn't damage the aircraft. It disassembled it. Pokrishkin had seen Schmidt's Messerschmitt fall, one round through the engine cowling. The entire front section separated, engine block shattered, propeller shaft snapped. The aircraft didn't glide down or trail smoke. It fell like debris because it had become debris in under 1 second. The Americans tried to use the 37mm like a machine gun, sustained bursts, multiple passes, gradual attrition. It jammed because it wasn't designed for that. The Soviets could use it like a cannon, single shots, devastating effect, engagement over. Soviet pilots already fought at ranges measured in meters, not hundreds of yards. They'd been trained to close within ramming distance. At 50 meters, a 37mm cannon with iron sights was point and click. You didn't need to lead the target or calculate deflection. You aimed at the center of mass and fired. One trigger pull, one round, one kill. The Americans needed multiple hits with lighter weapons. The Soviets needed one hit with a weapon that obliterated anything it touched. You don't need to dogfight if you can destroy the enemy in one shot. Traditional fighter tactics in 1942 followed a simple pattern. Get on the enemy's tail, stay there through sustained turns, and fire bursts until something critical broke. Dogfighting was endurance combat. You maneuvered for position, matched your opponent's turns, and squeezed the trigger in 3-second bursts until fuel caught fire, or the pilot slumped forward, or control cables snapped. It required skill, patience, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Pokrishkin threw all of it away. He called his system altitude, speed, maneuver, fire, 4 words that rewrote Soviet fighter doctrine. Not dogfighting, not sustained engagement, assassination from altitude. The training protocol was brutally simple. Start above the enemy, always. Dive from superior altitude, building speed until you're moving faster than they can react. Close to 50 yards or less, close enough to see panel lines on the fuselage. Fire 1 burst from the 37mm cannon. 1. Then break away immediately, using your speed to climb back to altitude before the enemy can respond. No turning fight, no tail chase, no sustained engagement. Strike and vanish. At 50 yards, the 37mm cannon didn't require precision. You didn't need to hit the cockpit for a pilot kill or the fuel tank for a fire. You just needed to hit the aircraft, anywhere. Wing root, fuselage, tail section, engine cowling. It didn't matter. A single high-explosive round traveling 2,500 feet per second would either shatter the engine block or cause catastrophic structural failure. American pilots aimed for specific components. Soviet pilots aimed for mass. The beauty of Pokrishkin's system was that Soviet pilots were already trained for it. Closing to ramming distance wasn't new. Soviet doctrine had demanded suicidal proximity for 2 years. Pilots who survived had zero fear of close-range combat. The P-39 simply gave them a weapon that could kill before they had to ram. And that quirky P-39 handling the tail-heavy design that killed American pilots became an advantage in Pokrishkin's tactics. The aircraft excelled in vertical maneuvers. It could pull into a near-vertical climb, hang on its propeller for 2 seconds, and fire straight down at pursuing aircraft. American pilots fought this tendency. Soviet pilots weaponized it. Pokrishkin trained his pilots to think in 3 dimensions. German pilots fought in the horizontal plane, turning, rolling, scissoring. Soviet pilots, in P-39 seconds, fought vertically climbing, diving, using altitude as both weapon and escape route. The Germans had better horizontal performance. The Soviets stopped fighting horizontally. Formation tactics evolved around the concept of execution rather than engagement. Pokrishkin developed a 2-aircraft element, one as bait, one as executioner. The bait aircraft flew low and visible, presenting an easy target. German pilots, confident in their superiority, would dive to engage. The executioner waited 3,000 feet above, invisible against the sun or clouds. When the German committed to the attack, when he focused entirely on the kill ahead of him, the executioner dove. 50 yards, 1 burst, break away. The German never saw what killed him. By November 1942, Pokrishkin's regiment had refined the system to mechanical precision. Pilots trained on specific scenarios: bounce from above, bounce from below, head-on pass, vertical reversal. Every scenario ended the same way: close to knife-fighting range, fire once, destroy completely. The 37mm cannon imposed discipline. With only 30 rounds, you couldn't spray and pray. Every shot had to count. Pokrishkin's pilots learned to hold fire until the shot was perfect. 50 yards, center mass, 1 trigger pull. They tracked their accuracy obsessively. Rounds fired versus kills confirmed. The best pilots achieved ratios of 3-to-1. 3 rounds fired, 1 kill confirmed. Some managed 2-to-1. The truly exceptional achieved 1-to-1. 1 round, 1 kill. Textbook execution. German pilots didn't understand what was happening. They'd engage what looked like an inferior aircraft, and suddenly their wingman would explode. Not catch fire, not trail smoke. Explode. The entire aircraft would disintegrate in midair, pieces tumbling through the sky like shrapnel. And the P-39 that killed him would already be climbing away, untouchable, gone. This wasn't air combat as anyone understood it. This was predation, clinical, efficient, brutal. Pokrishkin's pilots didn't circle and joust. They struck from surprise, killed with certainty, and vanished before retaliation was possible. One German pilot, captured after bailing out, described it simply: "You don't fight them, they just execute you." He was right. Traditional dogfighting assumed both sides wanted to fight. Pokrishkin's system assumed the enemy never saw it coming. By the time they realized a P-39 was there, they were already dead, their aircraft coming apart around them, the engine block shattered, the fuselage torn open by a round designed to kill tanks. The Germans called it unfair. Soviet pilots called it survival. They weren't hunting, they were executing. November 1942. Pokrishkin's first week flying the P-39 inches combat. 6 sorties, 4 confirmed kills. Not 4 damaged. Not 4 probables. 4 German aircraft destroyed so completely that wreckage identification required checking serial numbers against missing aircraft lists. Each kill followed the same pattern: dive from altitude, close to point-blank range, 1 burst from the 37mm. Catastrophic structural failure. The target didn't spiral down trailing smoke. It came apart in mid-air. Lieutenant Grigory Reshkolov, 22 years old, from a village in the Ural Mountains, joined Pokrishkin's regiment in December. First month flying the P-39, 8 confirmed kills. His ground crew started painting small red stars on his engine cowling. They ran out of space by January. German after-action reports flooded Luftwaffe intelligence offices. Pilots described the same thing repeatedly: Soviet aircraft firing unknown weapons that destroyed fighters with single hits. Engine blocks shattered. Wings separated, fuselages torn open. The damage patterns didn't match any known Soviet armament. Unknown weapon system, one report stated. Single-round destruction. Possibly new anti-aircraft cannon adapted for air-to-air use. Luftwaffe intelligence analysts studied the reports. They knew Soviet armament specs. The Shefvac 20mm cannon didn't have this kind of destructive power. Neither did the Berezin 12.7mm. This was something new, something the Soviets had developed in secret. They didn't believe it could be the P-39. That aircraft was a known quantity, a joke. American and British pilots had already proven it useless. The idea that the Soviets had somehow turned it into an effective weapon seemed impossible. More likely captured German cannons, one analyst concluded. Or new Soviet design based on our Mk-108. The reports kept coming. The 12th of January 1943. Airspace south of Stalingrad. Rechkalov flew top cover for a ground attack mission. His wingman spotted 6 Focke-Wulf 4 190 seconds 3,000 feet above them. The 190 was Germany's newest fighter, faster than the Bf-109, better roll rate, heavier armament, feared by every Allied pilot who faced it. The lead 190 was flown by Hauptmann Werner. Hoffmann 73 confirmed kills. Knight's Cross, one of the most experienced pilots on the Eastern Front. Hoffmann saw the P-39 seconds and smiled. Easy kills. He signaled his formation and dove. Rechkalov broke left, pulling his P-39 into a hard turn. Hoffmann followed easily. The 4-190 could outturn anything the Soviets flew. He closed the distance, centered the gun sight, and prepared to fire. Rechkalov stopped turning. Instead, he pulled back hard on the stick. The P-39 pitched up violently, standing nearly vertical. Hoffmann flashed underneath. His carefully calculated deflection shot suddenly wrong. His aircraft was below the target. Looking up at the P-39's belly, Rechkalov fired straight down. One burst, 2 rounds. The first missed. The second entered Hoffmann's engine, cowling at the cylinder head. The BMW 801 engine, 14 cylinders, 42 liters, 1,800 horsepower disintegrated. The 37mm round punched through the crankcase, through the engine mounts, through the firewall. The engine block split in half. The separated halves tore through the lower fuselage. The entire bottom section of the aircraft opened like a trap door. Hoffmann's last radio transmission lasted 2 seconds. It's not possible. The transmission cut off. The Fu-190 inverted and fell, trailing pieces of engine. Hoffmann managed to bail out at 800 feet. His parachute opened. He landed in Soviet-controlled territory and was captured within an hour. Soviet intelligence officers questioned him that evening. "What happened to your aircraft?" "I don't know. The engine exploded." "What hit you?" "I don't know. I was engaging a P-39. Then my aircraft came apart." "A P-39? "Yes." The intelligence officer wrote this down slowly. "The American aircraft? The one with the engine in the back?" "Yes." "And it shot you down?" Hoffmann stared at him. "I had 73 kills. 3 years of combat. I've fought Spitfires, Hurricanes, every Soviet fighter you have. That P-39 destroyed my aircraft with 1 shot. I don't know how. I don't know what weapon it was carrying. But it wasn't the same P-39 we've been briefed about." The intelligence officer didn't believe him. Combat stress, trauma. Hoffmann had been shot down by something probably ground fire, and his mind was filling gaps with false memories. Nobody destroyed a Fu-190 ace with a single shot from a P-39. But Rechkalov's gun camera told the truth. 1 burst, 1 hit, engine destruction, aircraft disintegration. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. The P-39's 37mm cannon had punched a hole through the BMW 801 large enough to fit a man's head through. By mid-January, Pokrishkin's regiment had 42 confirmed kills. Rechkalov had 12. Another pilot, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Glinka, had 9. The pattern was consistent across all of them. Single shots, catastrophic damage, complete destruction. German intelligence still didn't connect it to the P-39. Their briefing documents stated clearly that the Airacobra was ineffective at air-to-air combat. The Americans had proven this. The British had confirmed it. The idea that Soviet pilots had somehow mastered an aircraft two Western air forces had rejected was too absurd to consider. So, they kept filing reports about unknown weapon systems and new Soviet cannons, while Pokrishkin's pilots kept executing German aces with an aircraft everyone knew was garbage. By January 1943, not possible was happening every day. Spring 1943. Luftwaffe High Command issued new tactical directives to all Eastern Front squadrons. Avoid close engagement with P-39 Airacobras. Maintain altitude advantage. Use speed to dictate engagement terms. Do not pursue into low-altitude combat. The directive made tactical sense. German aircraft had superior high-altitude performance. The Bf-109 could climb higher. The W-190 could dive faster. If German pilots maintained altitude discipline, the P-39's advantages disappeared. The problem was, the Eastern Front didn't allow altitude discipline. German ground forces needed close air support. Luftwaffe squadrons flew ground attack missions, daily strafing Soviet positions, bombing supply lines, supporting advancing troops. Ground attack meant low altitude. 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet, sometimes treetop level. At that altitude, maintaining advantage was impossible. Soviet pilots exploited this ruthlessly. They lurked in ground clutter, hiding against terrain, waiting for German aircraft committed to attack runs. When a Messerschmitt dove to strafe Soviet trenches, a P-39 would materialize from the landscape and fire. One burst. Engine destruction. The German pilot wouldn't know he was targeted until his aircraft started disintegrating. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Glinka, 24 years old from a village outside Novosibirsk, had been an aircraft mechanic before the war. He understood engines better than most pilots understood flying. When he transferred to P-39 seconds in February 1943, he immediately started modifying his aircraft. He added extra armor plating around the 37mm ammunition bay. Not for protection for weight. The additional 60 pounds made the aircraft even more nose-heavy, which Soviet pilots had learned to weaponize. It also meant he could pull harder in vertical maneuvers without stalling. Then he developed something the Luftwaffe couldn't counter, the dead engine tactic. Glinka would cut his engine during patrol, letting the P-39 glide silently at low altitude. The Allison V-1710 made a distinctive sound. German pilots recognized it instantly. When the engine went silent, they assumed mechanical failure or combat damage. Easy kill, wounded aircraft limping home. They'd close for the finish. Glinka would restart the engine at the last second, pull into a violent climb, and fire before the German understood what was happening. The entire sequence took 4 seconds. Engine restart. Nose up. Trigger pull. Enemy aircraft falling in pieces. His first kill using this method was a Bf-109, flown by a pilot with 38 confirmed victories. The German closed to 100 yards, lining up the coup de grace. Glinka's engine roared to life. The P-39 pitched vertical. One 37mm round entered the Messerschmitt's engine at the oil pan. The entire engine seized instantly. The propeller stopped mid-rotation. The aircraft nosed over and crashed inverted. Glinka landed with 28 rounds remaining. 1 fired, 1 kill. By April, he'd refined the tactic to perfection. 12 confirmed kills in 6 weeks. Every single one followed the same pattern. Appear damaged, wait for the German to commit, kill them at point-blank range. German pilots started reporting ghost planes, P-39 seconds that seemed dead, but would suddenly attack. Intelligence officers didn't know what to make of the reports. Aircraft with failed engines couldn't attack. The reports had to be wrong, but the wreckage told the story. 12 Luftwaffe fighters destroyed, all with the same damage pattern. Single 37mm, round through the engine block. All engaged at extremely close range. all attacking what appeared to be damaged Soviet aircraft. Luftwaffe Command issued updated directives. Do not engage apparently damaged P-39 seconds. Maintain distance. Confirm the kill from standoff range. Soviet pilots adapted immediately. They'd fly in pairs. One would cut their engine, appearing damaged. The other would stay hidden at altitude. When Germans maintained standoff distance to confirm the kill, the hidden aircraft would dive and execute them from above. The Germans tried implementing minimum engagement altitudes. Soviet P-39 seconds started operating exclusively below that altitude, forcing Germans to either ignore them or violate their own directives. The Germans tried assigning dedicated P-39 hunters experienced aces who understood the threat. Soviet pilots would cluster together, presenting multiple targets. When the German committed to one, the others would execute him from unexpected angles. Every tactical adjustment the Luftwaffe implemented created new vulnerabilities. Maintain altitude. Soviets exploited your predictability. Engage only at range. Soviets forced close combat during ground attack. Assign specialists. Soviets overwhelmed them with numbers. The fundamental problem was that the P-39's advantages, devastating single-shot firepower, excellent low-altitude performance, and pilots with zero fear of close combat, couldn't be countered by tactics designed for conventional dogfighting. German pilots were trained to think in terms of sustained engagement, gradual advantage, and technical superiority. Soviet P-39 pilots thought in terms of ambush, execution, and accepting casualties as long as the exchange ratio favored them. And the exchange ratio did favor them. By May 1943, Pokrishkin's regiment alone had destroyed over 90 German aircraft while losing 31 P-39 seconds, 3-to-1 ratio. Unsustainable for the Luftwaffe. One captured German pilot, asked how to counter the P-39 threat, responded simply, "Don't fly on the Eastern Front." Every solution the Luftwaffe tried just created new vulnerabilities. Captain Nikolai Gulayev learned to fly before he learned to kill. Former schoolteacher from Smolensk, 26 years old. He'd taught mathematics to children before the war. He understood numbers, probabilities, the cold logic of statistics. By April 1943, he had 19 confirmed kills in his P-39. Then his aircraft took ground fire over Kharkov. The oil line ruptured, engine seized. He crash-landed 15 miles behind German lines in freezing rain. The impact shattered his left leg. He crawled from the wreckage as fuel pooled around hot metal. 30 seconds later, the P-39 exploded, flames visible for miles. German patrols would arrive within the hour. Gulayev limped into the forest. 3 weeks in April. Snow still falling at night. Temperatures dropping to -10 Celsius. He had no food, no medical supplies, no map, just a compass and the knowledge that Soviet lines were somewhere east. He walked at night, hid during the day. Ate bark when he could find nothing else. His leg became infected. Fever set in. He should have died in that forest. The numbers said he would die. On day 22, a Soviet patrol found him collapsed in a stream bed 8 miles inside friendly territory. He'd walked over 60 miles on a shattered leg. His left hand had severe frostbite. 3 fingers were black, dead tissue that couldn't be saved. The field surgeon amputated them without anesthetic. Morphine was reserved for soldiers who could return to combat. Gulayev bit through a leather strap and didn't scream. Medical command issued discharge papers. Combat pilot with 7 fingers couldn't fly fighters. Gulayev tore up the papers in front of the doctor. "I can still pull a trigger," he said. "I can still see through a gun sight. The P-39 doesn't require 10 fingers. 6 weeks later, he was back in his cockpit. His ground crew had modified the throttle control so he could operate it with his remaining fingers. He flew with his left hand taped to the stick. First mission back. 2 confirmed kills, both with single shots. Both German aircraft destroyed completely. He would end the war with 57 victories, 51 of them after losing 3 fingers. Lieutenant André Trude was 23 years old, with 11 confirmed kills when his engine caught fire over the Donets River on the 17th of May 1943. He was at 800 feet, engaging 2 BF 109 seconds. One burst from his 37mm destroyed the lead Messerschmitt. The wingman fired back 20mm rounds, punching through Trude's engine cowling. Coolant sprayed, oil ignited. Flames erupted from the engine compartment, spreading into the cockpit. Standard procedure. Bail out immediately. At 800 feet, he had maybe 15 seconds before the aircraft became uncontrollable. Below him, a German tank column moved along the main road. 15 vehicles, panzers, half-tracks, supply trucks, supporting the German advance towards Soviet positions. Trude didn't reach for the canopy release. He pushed the stick forward. The P-39 dove, flames streaming behind it like a comet. The tank scattered, but armor doesn't scatter fast. Trude aimed for the densest cluster, 3 Panzer IVs moving in formation. Impact at 400 miles per hour. The P-39's remaining fuel exploded on contact. The blast consumed 2 tanks immediately. The third caught fire, ammunition cooking off inside. Crew members who bailed out were caught in the secondary explosion. Soviet ground forces watching from trenches 200 yards away reported the entire sequence. One officer wrote in his after-action report, "The pilot had time to escape. He chose to attack instead. The explosion destroyed 3 enemy tanks and blocked the road for 6 hours." André Trude received Hero of the Soviet Union posthumously. His mother accepted the medal in Moscow. She was told her son died destroying enemy forces. She wasn't told about the flames, the deliberate dive, the choice he made. The statistics were brutal and simple. 40% of P-39 pilots became casualties during their service. Shot down, killed in crashes, died from wounds. The aircraft's aggressive tactics demanded close-range combat, and close-range combat meant exposure. But those casualties took 3 to 4 Germans with them before they died. The mathematics worked. Lose 1 trained Soviet pilot, kill 3 trained German aces. Soviet pilot training took 6 months. German aces took 3 years to develop. The exchange ratio, calculated coldly, favored the Soviets. The human cost was never cold. Soviet mechanics worked through winter in -40-degree weather, hands freezing to metal tools, keeping P-39 seconds operational. They repaired battle damage with salvaged parts, fabricated replacements from scrap metal, performed engine overhauls in conditions that would shut down Western maintenance facilities. One mechanic lost 4 fingers to frostbite repairing a damaged propeller hub at night. He continued working with 7 fingers, same as WWII continued flying. Ground crews painted kill markers on engine cowlings, red stars for each victory. Some aircraft had 20 stars, 30. The record was 43 stars on a single P-39, flown by 5 different pilots over 18 months. 3 of those pilots died in that aircraft. The other 2 survived with injuries. Every kill came at a price. WWII paid with 3 fingers and 3 weeks of hell. Trude paid with his life. Mechanics paid with frostbite and exhaustion. The math was finally in their favor. But math doesn't account for pain. It just counts the dead. Summer 1943. Soviet intelligence intercepted a letter from Unteroffizier Martin Becker to his wife in Hamburg. Becker had 42 confirmed kills, 2 years on the Eastern Front, Iron Cross First Class. His letter was marked undeliverable. His wife had died in an RAF bombing raid 3 weeks earlier. Soviet translators read it anyway. "You can survive being hit by 100 machine gun bullets," Becker wrote. "The aircraft gets damaged. You limp home, mechanics patch the holes. But 1 shell from that cannon executes your plane. There's no limping home, no emergency landing. The aircraft just stops being an aircraft. It becomes pieces falling from the sky, and you fall with them." The letter continued for 3 pages. Technical observations about the P-39's tactics. Descriptions of friends dying. A note that he'd requested transfer to any other sector, North Africa, Italy, France, anywhere but the Eastern Front. Request denied. They tell us we're winning, Becker wrote. But the Soviets have a weapon we can't counter, and more of them arrive every week. I've survived this long through skill and luck. My luck is running out. Martin Becker died 4 days after writing that letter. His Bf 109 was destroyed by a single 37mm round through the engine block at 300 meters. The Soviet pilot who killed him was 19 years old, with 6 confirmed victories. German intelligence collected dozens of similar letters throughout summer, 1,943. The pattern was consistent. Experienced pilots expressing fear of a specific aircraft, requesting transfers, describing a weapon system they couldn't defeat. Luftwaffe units in P-39 sectors began requesting transfers en masse. Entire squadrons petitioned for reassignment. Command denied most requests. Someone had to fly on the Eastern Front. Morale reports flagged crisis levels in certain units. Pilots started breaking formation when P-39 seconds appeared, not retreating tactically, scattering, panicking. This was a court-martial offense. Command prosecuted anyway, but the problem persisted. You couldn't court-martial half your fighter force. June 1943. Hauptmann Friedrich Lang, 89 confirmed kills, Knight's Cross with oak leaves, received a mission briefing. Ground attack near Kursk. Intelligence reported P-39 activity in the sector. Lang refused the mission. I've survived this long by knowing when I'm outmatched, he told his commanding officer. Those aircraft can't be engaged safely at the altitudes we're required to fly. Sending us there isn't tactical, it's suicide. His CO reported the refusal up the chain. Command had a problem. Lang was a decorated ace, propaganda hero, proven combat leader. But he'd refused a direct order during active operations. They court-martialed him anyway, reduced rank, sent to training command in Germany. Better to lose one ace to discipline than allow refusal to spread. It spread anyway. By July, German pilots had given the P-39 a new nickname, Cobra. Not the Russian word, the German, Cobra. The snake that kills with one strike. The name wasn't respect, it was fear. Soviet intelligence learned the nickname from interrogations. Captured German pilots would describe encounters with the Cobra, in tones usually reserved for natural disasters. One pilot, asked to identify the aircraft that shot him down, said simply, "It was the Cobra. That's all that matters." Soviet pilots embraced it immediately. Ground crews started painting Cobra emblems on P-39 engine cowlings. Stylized snakes coiled around red stars, fangs bared. Pokrishkin's personal aircraft had a Cobra wrapped around the 37mm cannon barrel, painted in yellow and black. The message was clear. One strike, one kill. German radio intercepts confirmed the psychological impact. Luftwaffe pilots warned each other when P-39 seconds were spotted. Not tactical updates warnings. Cobra, at 3 o'clock, carried different weight than enemy fighters at 3 o'clock. It meant break off immediately, gain altitude, escape if possible. Soviet pilots exploited this. They deliberately exposed themselves at distance, letting Germans see the distinctive profile. Some Germans would engage anyway, courage or desperation, or orders. Others would break away immediately, abandoning their missions to avoid contact. One Soviet pilot, Lieutenant Boris Glinka, reported shooting down 3 German aircraft in a single sortie without firing a shot. He'd positioned himself between a German ground attack formation and their escape route. When they saw his P-39, they scattered into each other. 2 Bf 109 seconds collided. A third full of 190 pulled too hard trying to evade, stalled, and crashed. Glinka's gun camera footage confirmed it. 0 rounds fired. 3 German aircraft destroyed by fear alone. By August 1943, the psychological transformation was complete. German pilots who'd started the war treating Soviet aircraft as target practice now calculated escape routes before engaging. Aces with hundreds of kills requested transfers. Squadron commanders filed reports, stating their pilots were combat ineffective in sectors with heavy P-39 presence. The Predators had become prey. They'd learned to fear not just the weapon, but the sound. The Allison V-1710 had a distinctive exhaust note, different from German or Soviet engines. German pilots could identify it from miles away. When they heard that sound, veterans with years of experience and dozens of kills would look for escape routes before looking for targets. The hunters had learned to fear the sound of a specific engine. July 1943. Kursk salient. Germany launched Operation Citadel, the last major offensive on the Eastern Front. Everything committed. 900,000 men, 2,700 tanks, 2,000 aircraft. Hitler had staked the war on breaking the Soviet lines here. The Luftwaffe sent its best. Jagdgeschwader 51, the Mulder's Wing, home to dozens of aces, with over 100 kills each. JG 52, which would produce the highest scoring ace in history. JG 54, the Green Hearts, veterans of 3 years continuous combat. Hundreds of experienced pilots. Thousands of sorties planned. Against them, Soviet 16th Air Army, heavy concentration of P-39 regiments, Pokrishkin's unit, Rechkalov's squadron, Glinka's flight, pilots who'd spent 8 months turning the worst fighter ever built into an execution weapon. July 5. The offensive began. German armor pushed forward under air cover. Soviet ground forces called for air support. P-39 seconds responded in waves. The air battle that followed was the largest in history. Over 4,000 aircraft engaged over 8 days. The sky above Kursk became a killing field at 6,000 feet. Pokrishkin's regiment flew 6 sorties on the first day. 58 confirmed kills by day's end. 7 P-39 seconds lost. The exchange ratio that Luftwaffe Command had considered impossible was now routine. July 7. Pokrishkin launched at dawn, leading 4 P-39 seconds against a formation of 12 FW 190 seconds escorting Ju-87 Stukas. The Germans had altitude advantage, numerical superiority, and the best fighter aircraft Germany produced. Pokrishkin didn't engage the 190 seconds directly. He dove past them, ignoring their presence, targeting the Stukas below. The 190 seconds followed they had to. Their mission was escort. Following him down was what he wanted. At 4,000 feet, Pokrishkin's elements scattered the Stuka formation with a single pass. 3 Stukas destroyed. The 4 190 seconds dove after them, abandoning altitude advantage to protect their charges. That's when Pokrishkin reversed. He pulled vertical, the P-39 standing on its tail, climbing back through the diving 190 formation. The first FL 190 passed within 50 yards. Pokrishkin fired. 1 burst. The 37mm round entered the BMW 801 engine at the accessory drive. The engine didn't fail, it exploded. Supercharger disintegrated. Propeller separated. The 190 tumbled, inverted, trailing fire. Second one, 190. Close pass. 1 burst. Engine block shattered. Oil sprayed across Pokrishkin's windscreen. The German aircraft nosed over and dove straight into the ground. Third 190. The pilot saw Pokrishkin coming, tried to evade. Too late. 50 yards. 1 burst. The round entered the wing root, detonated inside the fuel tank. The Fu 190 disintegrated. Debris field 300 yards wide. 3 kills, 1 sortie, 90 seconds of combat. 3 rounds fired from his 37mm cannon. The remaining 190 seconds broke formation and scattered. Pokrishkin landed with battle damage 20mm rounds through his left wing, hydraulics failing, fuel gauge reading empty. His ground crew counted 3 rounds expended. His gun camera confirmed 3 kills, each with single bursts, each showing catastrophic engine or structural failure. The Luftwaffe pilot who'd led that 190 formation bailed out and was captured. Soviet intelligence questioned him that evening. "You're experienced. Why didn't you maintain altitude advantage? We had orders to protect the Stukas. Why didn't your formation engage more effectively?" Long pause. "We knew they were there. The Cobras. We knew what they could do. We couldn't refuse the mission. We just flew anyway. And your wingmen? Dead. All of them. One burst each. We never had a chance." The statistics from Kursk told the story Luftwaffe command didn't want to hear. P-39 units achieved 3-to-1 kill ratios throughout the 8-day battle. 3 Germans dead for every Soviet loss. These were the same P-39 units that had negative ratios 6 months earlier, more losses than kills, more coffins than victories. The transformation was complete. Pokrishkin ended the Battle of Kursk with 40 confirmed kills. He was 29 years old. He'd started flying the P-39 10 months earlier, with 19 kills total. 21 kills in 10 months of execution tactics. He would end the war with 59 confirmed victories, every single one in the aircraft America called a failure. Rechkalov reached 38 kills at Kursk. Glinka reached 24. Soviet propaganda celebrated them as heroes. German intelligence tried to explain how aces with hundreds of kills were dying to pilots with dozens. They couldn't. The Battle of Kursk ended on July 12. Germany's offensive failed. Soviet counteroffensives began immediately. The Wehrmacht would never launch another major attack on the Eastern Front. Historians would call Kursk the turning point of the war in the East. The air battle was part of that turning point. The Luftwaffe entered Kursk expecting air superiority. They left having lost over 1,000 aircraft in 8 days. Many to a weapon system they'd mocked 18 months earlier. The aircraft America called a failure had just helped win history's largest tank battle. Late 1943. Oberleutnant Stefan Richter sat across from Soviet intelligence officers in a prisoner camp outside Moscow. 91 confirmed kills. Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. One of the Luftwaffe's most decorated aces. Shot down over Smolensk by a P-39, flown by a 20-year-old pilot with 13 victories. The intelligence officer asked the standard questions. Unit, squadron, base locations. Richter answered mechanically, providing information the Soviets already knew. Then, the officer asked about the P-39. Long silence. Richter looked at the table. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from something else. Finally, respect for the pilots, fear of the weapon. Explain. Your pilots fly with courage we can't match. They close to ranges we're trained to avoid. And that cannon. He paused. It doesn't damage aircraft. It executes them. I've seen it destroy fighters with single rounds. I've watched pilots with more experience than I have die before they understood what was happening. The P-39 is American designed. Your intelligence called it inferior. We were wrong. Simple statement, no elaboration. 3 words that contradicted 2 years of Luftwaffe doctrine. By October 1943, Luftwaffe Tactical Command issued updated combat manuals. New section, Engagement Protocols. Soviet P-39 Airacobra. 6 pages of tactical recommendations that contradicted everything previously published about the aircraft. Primary recommendation: avoid engagement unless overwhelming numerical advantage can be maintained. Minimum ratio: 4-to-1. Secondary protocols: maintain altitude superiority at all times. Do not pursue into low-altitude combat. Disengage immediately if numerical advantage is lost. Treat all P-39 encounters as high-priority threats. The manual described the 37mm cannon's effects in clinical detail. Penetration characteristics, blast radius, lethality against German aircraft structures. It read like a threat assessment for a strategic weapon, not a fighter's armament. German pilots who survived P-39 encounters shared stories that sounded impossible. Hauptmann Karl Weiss described a round that passed between his Bf-109's engine cylinders without detonating. The shell didn't explode, but the engine destroyed itself anyway. The hydrostatic shock from the round passing through the oil system created a pressure wave that cracked the engine block. I had maybe 10 seconds of power before complete seizure. He'd bailed out at 1,200 feet, watched his aircraft auger into frozen ground. The engine post-mortem showed the 37mm round had missed every critical component, pistons, crankshaft, cylinder heads, yet the engine was completely destroyed. The kinetic energy alone had been enough. Another pilot described his wingman's death. One moment his aircraft was there, the next moment it was debris. No explosion, no fire, just instantaneous structural failure. The 37mm round hit his wing root. The entire wing separated, both wings, simultaneously, as if the aircraft had been designed to come apart at that exact point. Soviet aces proliferated throughout late 1943. Pokrishkin with 59 confirmed kills, Rechkalov with 56, Gulayev with 57, Glinka with 43. At least 50 Soviet pilots achieved ace status, 5 or more kills flying the P-39. Many exceeded 20 kills. Some exceeded 40, all flying the aircraft that had been mocked 18 months earlier. German propaganda faced a problem. They'd spent 1,942 telling their public the P-39 was proof of American incompetence, evidence that Lend-Lease was helping Germany win. Now German aces were dying to that same aircraft at catastrophic rates. The propaganda shifted subtly. References to the P-39 disappeared from official reports. When Soviet aviation victories were mentioned, they attributed them to Soviet fighters or enemy aircraft, without specifying type. Some reports claimed the Soviets had developed new indigenous fighters based on captured German technology. Anything except admitting the Americans had built something effective and the Soviets had figured out how to use it. German military leadership understood the truth. Internal reports acknowledged the P-39 as a significant threat, but public admission was impossible. It would mean admitting they'd been wrong about American manufacturing quality, wrong about Soviet pilot capabilities, wrong about their own tactical superiority. It would mean admitting hundreds of German aces had died to an aircraft their own intelligence had called worthless. One captured Luftwaffe officer, Major Hans Gruber, explained it simply during interrogation. "We can't admit we were wrong about the Cobra. Every pilot who died fighting it, and there are hundreds, died believing our intelligence assessments were accurate. Admitting we underestimated it would mean admitting they died for nothing, because we sent them against a weapon we didn't understand." Soviet intelligence officers noted this in their reports. The psychological impact of the P-39 wasn't just tactical, it was existential. German pilots had built their confidence on technological superiority and tactical excellence. The P-39 challenged both assumptions. Inferior aircraft, by German assessment, had killed hundreds of their best pilots. The Soviets hadn't won through superior technology, they'd won by refusing to fight according to German rules. By December 1943, the transformation was complete. Luftwaffe pilots who encountered P-39 seconds no longer laughed. They calculated escape routes, called for reinforcements, or broke off engagement entirely. The contempt was gone, grudging respect remained, and beneath that respect, fear. Admitting they'd been wrong would mean admitting they died for nothing. The numbers don't lie. They just tell stories nobody wants to hear. Bell Aircraft Corporation manufactured 9,584 P-39 Airacobras between 1,941 and 1,944. Total production run, the U.S. Army Air Forces kept roughly half for training and limited combat use. They sent 4,773 aircraft to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Almost exactly half of total production went to pilots who'd been dismissed as desperate and undertrained. Those desperate pilots turned the P-39 into the most successful American fighter aircraft of World War II. Soviet ace count in P-39 seconds exceeded every other aircraft type in their inventory. More aces in the American reject than in the Yak-9, the La-5, or any indigenous Soviet fighter. The top 3 Soviet aces of the war, Pokrishkin with 59 kills, Rechkalov with 56, Gulayev with 57, all flew P-39 seconds exclusively during their peak scoring periods. Not just the top 3. At least 50 Soviet pilots achieved ace status flying P-39 seconds. 23 exceeded 20 kills, 12 exceeded 30, 5 exceeded 40. These weren't inflated propaganda numbers. German records captured after the war confirmed Soviet claims within 10% accuracy. The kill-to-loss ratio told the transformation story in pure mathematics. Early 1942, when P-39 seconds first arrived. Negative ratio, more losses than kills. American and British assessment confirmed. By mid-1943, 1-to-1 parity. By late 1943, 2-to-1 in Soviet favor. By war's end, 2.5-to-1. For every P-39 lost, 2.5 German aircraft destroyed. Compare this to the P-51 Mustang, considered by many the best fighter of the war. Similar production numbers, 15,000 manufactured. Superior performance in almost every measurable category: speed, range, altitude, climb rate. The Mustang produced exceptional American aces, but it didn't produce 50 aces in a single air force. It didn't achieve 2.5-to-1 kill ratios on the most brutal air combat front in history. The P-47 Thunderbolt was technically better than the P-39 inches every specification. Faster, tougher, better armed, longer range. It produced great American pilots, won air superiority over Europe, earned legendary status. But the highest-scoring American ace in a P-47 had 28 kills. Pokrishkin had 59 inches of P-39. The irony was unavoidable and uncomfortable. The most successful American fighter aircraft of World War II, measured by aces produced and kill ratios achieved, wasn't flown by Americans. It was flown by Soviets using tactics Americans had never imagined, in combat conditions Americans had never experienced, achieving results Americans couldn't replicate. U.S. military records post-war maintained embarrassed silence about the P-39's Soviet success. Official histories praised the Mustang, the Thunderbolt, the Lightning. The Era Cobra received footnotes. Limited success in specific theaters. Effective in ground attack roles. Technical discussions about its failures in American service. The Soviet numbers were mentioned briefly, if at all. When discussed, they were qualified. Soviet pilots claimed. Unverified reports suggest. Propaganda figures may have inflated. The implication was clear. Soviet success with the P-39 was somehow suspect, probably exaggerated, definitely not representative of the aircraft's true capabilities. German records destroyed that narrative. Luftwaffe loss reports, captured intact in 1945, listed thousands of aircraft destroyed by Soviet fighters. Cross-referenced with Soviet claims, the numbers matched. Pokrishkin's 59 kills, German records confirmed 54.91% accuracy. Rechkalov's 56, Germans confirmed 51. The Soviet numbers were real. More damning, German tactical assessments from 1,943 to 1,945 listed the P-39 as a high-priority threat. Cobra appeared in hundreds of intelligence reports. Luftwaffe training manuals devoted entire sections to P-39 engagement protocols. German aces who survived the war consistently identified the P-39 as one of the most dangerous aircraft they faced. The Americans had built it. The British had rejected it. The Soviets had mastered it, and the numbers proved it definitively. Bell aircraft engineers, reviewing Soviet combat data after the war, struggled to reconcile the statistics with their understanding of the aircraft. The P-39 wasn't supposed to be capable of these results. It was designed for high-altitude interception and had failed miserably in that role. The Soviets had used it for low-altitude combat, completely wrong according to the design specifications, and achieved extraordinary success. One Bell engineer, in an internal memo from 1947, wrote, "The Soviet results suggest we fundamentally misunderstood our own aircraft's optimal employment. We designed for one war, and they fought a different one. The data indicates the P-39 was highly effective when used outside design parameters. This challenges basic assumptions about aircraft development." That memo was classified and filed away. Admitting the Soviets had been right would mean admitting American tactical doctrine, aircraft design philosophy, and combat assessments had been wrong. The numbers told a story American pride didn't want to hear. Bell Aircraft Corporation's post-war analysis, declassified in the 1972, contained a section titled P-39 Performance Review, Soviet Theater, 23 pages of data, combat reports, and engineering assessments. The conclusion appeared on page 1. Soviet operational success with P-39 indicates fundamental misunderstanding of aircraft's optimal employment parameters. Corporate language for "we got it wrong." Lawrence Bell's private notes were more direct. The company founder and lead designer had kept detailed journals throughout the war. Entry dated August 1945. "We optimized for the wrong mission. Built an interceptor for a threat that never materialized in the form we expected. The Soviets succeeded because they ignored our intentions and discovered the aircraft's actual capabilities." The design process had started in 1937. American military doctrine predicted the next war would feature high-altitude strategic bombing, enemy bombers at 25,000 feet attacking American cities. Interceptors needed to climb fast, fight high, destroy bombers before they reached targets. Bell designed the P-39 specifically for that mission. The 37mm cannon was meant to destroy bomber formations with minimal rounds. The engine placement was meant to improve weight distribution for high-altitude handling. Every design choice optimized for bomber interception at altitude. That war never happened. Not for America. The Soviet reality was completely different. German bombers on the Eastern Front flew low 6,000 feet, sometimes lower. Ground support missions dominated. Fighter combat occurred at altitudes where the P-39's flaws became advantages. Bell's engineering team had never considered that engine behind pilot placement would improve forward visibility for ground attack. They'd focused on high-altitude center of gravity. They'd never imagined the 37mm cannon being used for single-shot fighter kills instead of sustained fire against bombers. American doctrine emphasized volume of fire. The massive cannon seemed like a mistake in that context. The Soviets had no doctrine for the P-39. They just had desperate need and willingness to experiment. They discovered what Bell's engineers had accidentally created: a low-altitude assassin with perfect visibility and devastating one-shot capability. Lawrence Bell learned this gradually through intelligence reports during the war. Soviet success confused him. The aircraft performed poorly in every scenario his team had designed it for, yet excelled in scenarios they'd never considered. Post-war, he tried to understand why. Bell Aircraft conducted extensive interviews with returning American pilots, reviewed captured German documents, and requested Soviet combat data through military channels. The pattern became clear. Context determined capability more than design specifications. Paris Air Show. Lawrence Bell was 97 years old, in a wheelchair, attending his final aviation event. Alexander Pokrishkin was 78, still sharp, representing the Russian Federation at the airshow's historical exhibits. Someone arranged a meeting. Translator present. Two men who'd shaped aviation history without ever having met. Bell spoke first. "I've read about your accomplishments. 59 victories, all in the aircraft I designed. I confess, I don't understand how you did it. We considered the P-39 a failed design." Pokrishkin smiled. "You gave us exactly what we needed. You just didn't know it. We designed it for high-altitude bomber interception. We needed low-altitude fighter assassination. Your aircraft was perfect for that mission. The engine placement gave us visibility. The cannon gave us killing power. The handling characteristics you considered dangerous, we weaponized. Bell was quiet for a moment. Then, I designed it for a war that never happened. You used it for the war you had. Yes, and we're grateful you built it. Even if you built it for wrong reasons. The exchange lasted 20 minutes. Bell asked technical questions. Pokrishkin described tactics. They discussed the 37mm cannon's performance, the engine's low-altitude capabilities, the modifications Soviet mechanics had implemented. At the end, Bell said, I spent 40 years thinking the P-39 was my failure. You're telling me it was a success I didn't recognize. Innovation isn't about perfect design, Pokrishkin replied. It's about right context. You built a masterpiece. We found the right war for it. The lesson extended beyond aircraft. The Sherman tank was another example. Adequate in U.S. Doctrine mobile, reliable, easy to produce. Weak in Soviet doctrine undergunned, under-armored compared to German heavy tanks. Same vehicle, different contexts, different results. The Soviet T-34 was crude by American manufacturing standards. Rough castings, basic optics, uncomfortable crew conditions. But it was perfect for Soviet needs, simple to build, easy to maintain in field conditions. Effective in the close-range tank battles that dominated the Eastern Front. Design competitions judged aircraft and weapons on technical specifications. Speed, armament, range, ceiling. The P-39 lost those competitions. It was slower than the P-51, less armed than the P-47, shorter range than both. But in the specific context of Eastern Front low-altitude combat, with pilots trained for close-range assassination tactics against an enemy expecting conventional dogfighting, the P-39 was perfect. Bell Aircraft never built another fighter after the war. The company shifted to helicopters and research aircraft. But Lawrence Bell kept that meeting with Pokrishkin as a defining moment. He'd spent decades believing he'd failed to build what the military wanted. Pokrishkin taught him he'd succeeded in building what someone needed, even though that someone was fighting a different war with different rules. The best weapon is the one that fits your fight, not the one that wins design competitions. May 1945. Germany surrendered. Soviet P-39 regiments received orders to return to base and stand down. Within 6 months, almost every P-39 inches Soviet service was scrapped, cannibalized for parts, melted down for metal, pushed into scrap heaps alongside German wrecks. The aircraft that had helped win air superiority on the Eastern Front was discarded immediately after victory. Obsolete. No longer needed. The war it was perfect for had ended. Alexander Pokrishkin survived. 59 confirmed kills. 3 times Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor. He became a Marshal of the Soviet Air Force, shaped post-war aviation doctrine, trained the next generation of pilots. He died in 1985 at age 72, buried with full military honors in Moscow. His hometown of Novosibirsk erected a statue, Pokrishkin in flight suit, looking skyward. Behind him, a P-39 Airacobra, frozen in bronze, climbing toward clouds it would never reach. The inscription read, "He showed us that victory comes not from having the best weapons, but from using what you have better than anyone thought possible." Grigory Rechkalov survived the war with 56 kills, became a test pilot, pushing experimental aircraft to their limits. March 1990, testing a new fighter prototype, the aircraft entered an unrecoverable flat spin. Rechkalov was 68 years old. He could have ejected, chose to ride it down, collecting data until impact, transmitting observations until the very end. The last Soviet ace of the Great Patriotic War died the way he'd lived at the edge of what aircraft could do. Nikolai Gulayev, the schoolteacher who'd walked 60 miles on a shattered leg, survived with 57 kills and 7 fingers. Returned to teaching after the war. Never spoke about his service unless asked directly. Lived quietly in a small apartment in Moscow. Died in 2013 at age 93. His obituary in Russian newspapers was 3 paragraphs. Western media didn't notice. Modern aviation museums tell the story of aircraft preservation through location. P-51 Mustangs fill American museums, dozens of restored examples, celebrated as the fighter that won air superiority over Europe. P-39 Airacobras, a handful in American collections, usually relegated to corners with plaques explaining their limited success. Russian museums have more P-39 seconds, carefully restored, featured prominently. Visitors walk around them, read about Pokrishkin and Rechkalov, learn about tactics that shouldn't have worked but did. To Americans, the P-39 is an embarrassing footnote. To Russians, it's a symbol of adaptation, innovation, and refusal to accept someone else's definition of impossible. American military doctrine still teaches high-altitude interception as fundamental fighter strategy. Air superiority through technological advantage, sustained engagement. Superior performance specifications. The P-39's lessons about context and adaptation rarely appear in official histories. But look at the A-10 Warthog. Modern close air support aircraft built around a massive 30mm cannon. Slow, ungainly. Can't dogfight. Designed for low-altitude ground attack with devastating single-shot capability. Sound familiar? The A-10 is the spiritual successor to the P-39. American engineers finally learned the lesson. Soviet pilots taught them. Sometimes a big cannon and the willingness to get close matter more than speed and altitude. The final numbers tell the strategic story. Germany lost air superiority over the Eastern Front in summer 1943. After Kursk, the Luftwaffe never regained it. Soviet aircraft, including thousands of P-39 seconds, dominated the skies for the remaining 2 years of war. The P-39 wasn't the only reason. Soviet industry, pilot training, numerical superiority, all contributed. But it was critical. Without those 4,773 P-39 seconds, would the Soviets have achieved air superiority when they did? The counterfactual is unknowable. But German records are clear. The Cobra forced tactical changes, created psychological impact, killed hundreds of experienced aces. It mattered. The life lesson extends far beyond aviation. Your greatest weakness can become your greatest strength if you're willing to change the rules of engagement. The P-39 was weak at high altitude, so the Soviets fought low. The 37mm cannon was too heavy for sustained dogfighting, so they stopped dogfighting. The aircraft was called a failure, so they ignored the label and discovered its actual capabilities. How many times do we do the opposite? We have skills that seem useless in conventional contexts, traits that don't fit standard career paths, approaches that violate accepted wisdom, and we try to fix ourselves, sand off the edges, become what everyone says we should be. The P-39 story suggests a different path. What if the flaw isn't you, it's the context you're trying to fit into? What if your wrong approach is actually right for a different fight? Don't let others define what good looks like in your situation. The Americans defined good as high-altitude performance. The Soviets defined good as whatever kills the enemy. One definition led to failure. The other to 59 victories. Sometimes success isn't about being the best. It's about being right for your fight, finding the context where your specific combination of capabilities, even the ones others call weaknesses, becomes devastating. Lieutenant Hans Weber. Chapter 1. Laughing at intelligence reports about P-39 seconds. Did he survive the war? Records don't confirm. His file lists him as missing, presumed killed, July 1943. Last radio transmission logged, the 9th of July 1943, 14:37 hours, airspace over Kursk. Audio quality poor, message fragmentary. Luftwaffe communications officer transcribed what he could hear. Engaging enemy fighters at static, it's the Cobra. Break off, break off. Static, too close, he's static. They're not supposed to be able to. Transmission ends. Aircraft wreckage found 3 days later, 12 kilometers south of last known position. Messerschmitt Bf. 109 G6. Engine block shattered. Single point of impact. Forensic analysis indicated 37 mm high explosive round. Pilot still in cockpit. Dead on impact. Hans Weber. 63 confirmed kills. 2 years of Eastern Front combat. Survived hundreds of engagements. Killed by an aircraft his own intelligence had called worthless 18 months earlier. The Germans who sent sarcastic congratulations to Stalin in spring 1942 weren't laughing by 1945. Most of them weren't anywhere. Shot down by the very aircraft they'd mocked, one 37 mm shell at a time, their aircraft falling like debris, their laughter drowned out by the sound of engines they'd learned to fear. The laughing stopped somewhere over Stalingrad. The reckoning came at Kursk, and when it was over, the joke had been on them all along.